Buried underneath all the flashy announcements for Apple's new stuff was this groundbreaking security feature. It's a piece of tech built deep inside the new iPhone 17 and iPhone Air, and it's designed to fight back against some of the most sophisticated hackers in the world.
But before we get into what Apple built, let's start with a question. Think about your phone right now. Do you know what its single biggest weakness is? It's something that affects pretty much every modern device out there, and for years it's been the absolute favorite entry point for spyware and surveillance tools. And here's the thing, this is not just an Apple problem. Not at all. Apple's own security team says this flaw is everywhere. It's in the whole tech industry, affecting Windows and Android just as much. It's this invisible threat that hackers have been taking advantage of for a very, very long time.
It's called a memory corruption bug. And honestly, the best way to get your head around it is to imagine your phone's memory as a bunch of different containers, right? Each one is holding the data for a different app. Well, this bug is what happens when one of those containers springs a leak, and its data spills over into other areas where it has absolutely no business being. And that spill, it is incredibly dangerous. The moment a hacker triggers that leak, they can wiggle their way into parts of the memory they were never, ever supposed to see. And from there, they can plant their own malicious code, which gives them wide open access to your photos, your messages, your location data, basically the whole shebang. And then they just send it all back to themselves over the internet.
So how do you stop the leak? Well, Apple's answer is a brand new digital shield they're calling Memory Integrity Enforcement, or just MIE for short. And it was designed for one very specific purpose, to plug this exact hole.
Now, this isn't just a software patch you download. MIE is a hardware-level security technology. It is physically built into the new iPhone 17 and iPhone Air. Its one and only job is to stop these memory-based attacks before they can even get their foot in the door.
Okay, so a hardware-level shield sounds impressive for sure, but what does it actually do? How does it manage to lock down your phone's memory and keep the bad guys out? The concept, believe it or not, is actually surprisingly simple. The heart of MIE is this idea of a secret tag. With this new system, every single little piece of your phone's memory gets its own unique password. You can kind of think of it like a digital lock and key system that's running millions of times a second right inside your phone. So let's walk through it. First, a piece of memory gets its secret tag. Then, any software that wants to access that memory has to show up with the exact matching tag. If a hacker tries to barge in with the wrong tag, or no tag at all, bam, access is instantly denied. The malicious software just crashes and the whole attempt gets logged, which makes it way easier for Apple and researchers to spot the attack.
The difference here is just it's stark. Before MIE, memory was like an open field, totally vulnerable to this spilling and spyware. With MIE, that field is now split up into millions of tiny locked plots. If you don't have the right key, you're simply not getting in.
So that's the tech. But what's the real-world impact? Well, the cybersecurity experts, the people who live and breathe this stuff, including some who build these kinds of tools for governments, they're calling this a massive, massive leap forward. I mean, just take a second to let this quote sink in. An expert who actually develops and sells cyber tools to the US government is saying the new iPhone is likely the most secure computing environment on the entire planet. That is a wild statement.
And the same researcher didn't stop there. They said that while, nothing is ever 100% hack-proof, this new tech is the closest thing we have ever gotten. It just fundamentally changes the game for anyone trying to break in.
So what does this mean for the spyware makers themselves, the ones causing all the trouble? Well, according to Apple security researcher Patrick Wardle, it makes their job infinitely more difficult. This isn't just a small speed bump for them, it's a giant wall in the middle of the road.
But, as with any major security breakthrough, there are a few important caveats. We have to be realistic. MIE is a massive wall, for sure, but you can bet that dedicated attackers are already looking for ways to go over, under, or right around it. And here's one crucial limitation. MIE protects all of Apple's own system apps by default, so things like Safari and iMessage, which are really common targets. But for all your third-party apps, like your social media or your banking apps, the developers have to actively choose to turn it on. So full protection is really going to depend on how quickly they adopt this new tool.
Ultimately, the biggest impact here might actually be economic.
MIE just makes it so much more expensive and time-consuming to create a working iPhone hack that it could honestly force some of these spyware vendors right out of the market. They now have to spend way more money and resources for a tool that's way more likely to fail.
Because in the end, this is the reality of cybersecurity. Like Patrick Wardle said, it's always a cat and mouse game. Apple builds a better mousetrap, and you know the hackers immediately start designing a smarter mouse. Apple has definitely made its move, building what might just be the most secure consumer device ever created. It's a huge step forward for our privacy and our security. But this really only guarantees one thing. The game is about to get a whole lot more interesting. The only question now is, who makes the next move?